Serena Williams. You know, she is married to billionaire Alexis Ohanian. And he came on First Take today to promote some new event that he's got going on with Atheos and all of that. And, you know, people are talking about how he came at me, you know, and took a sly dig, you know, because of what I said. And, you know, when Serena Williams was on stage performing at the Super Bowl. I've never met this man. I wish I was in studio today, but I'm not. I have a speaking engagement, so I'm out of town. That's why I was not there today. It would have been nice to meet him. I don't know the man. I have nothing against him whatsoever. I don't recall saying a negative word about him.
What started as a quiet interview quickly turned into a full-blown confrontation. Stephen A. Smith, one of the most polarizing voices in sports media, sat across from Ryan Clark on the Pivot podcast. But this wasn't your typical calm discussion. This was Stephen A. in defense mode, facing the backlash that's been haunting him all month. From Steven Jackson to Plies and even comedian Godfrey, everybody had something to say about him, calling him out for his different energy when it comes to black athletes versus white billionaires. And this time, the internet was watching closely to see if Stephen A. would finally admit what people have been accusing him of 4 years. It all started when Alexis Ohanian, the husband of tennis legend Serena Williams, appeared on First Take. He came across calm, collected.
Have the LeBron situation, you go at him, and then last week Alexis Ohanian comes on the show, and it's the whole big thing about him saying something about you not being married.
Right.
How do you weigh what you say about people because you may have a situation like that or that person is on your show and now you have to deal with them having residual feelings from something you already said?
Well, first of all, let's go to that Alexis Ohanian, Serena Williams' husband. It would have been an entirely different situation if I were in studio.
LeBron and you had the conversation courtside. You've been very honest about that interaction, and you said, okay, we don't like each other.
Right.
How do you feel you handled that situation overall? Are you proud of how that went?
I wouldn't use the word proud. I would tell you that I don't regret anything that I did in terms of handling the situation. I don't regret it now. And I would tell you my feelings haven't changed. I don't like him at all. He doesn't like me at all. I don't like talking about him because I think people think that I'm looking to talk about him. Like LeBron's inside of Stephen A.'s head. If you don't ask me about him, I won't talk about him. You see what I'm saying? I got a job to do, and he will never interfere with my job.
But Sharp, tossing a subtle jab at Stephen A. about giving marriage advice while never being married himself. The audience laughed, but the silence from Stephen A. that day said everything. Critics jumped online immediately. Where's that same energy you had for LeBron? Where's that fire you bring when it's your own people? And that's when Steven Jackson stepped in, the man who's never been afraid to speak his mind. He looked straight into the camera and said what millions were already thinking. You get loud and emotional with LeBron James, a black billionaire, but when that white billionaire checked you, you stayed humble. The video went viral. Hashtags exploded. The timeline turned into a courtroom and Stephen A. was a man on trial. For once, it seemed like the people have more power than his platform. But instead of firing back on ESPN, Stephen A. chose a different route. He went to Ryan Clark's Pivot podcast, a space built for black athletes, culture, and authenticity, hoping to rewrite the narrative on his own terms. And from the moment the camera started rolling, it was clear this wasn't about sports anymore. This was about reputation, about control, about Stephen A. Smith versus the culture that built him. He tried to explain himself calmly, even humbly. He said if he had been in the studio with Ohanian, it would have been a different story. He framed it like timing and logistics kept him from responding. But the tone, that tone didn't match the man we've seen for years. Gone was the shouting, the finger pointing, the trademark "let me tell you something" energy. Instead, he was soft-spoken, measured, almost rehearsed. And the internet noticed. He's humble when it's white folks, but combative when it's us, one fan tweeted. Another said, he's using Ryan Clark's show as damage control. Classic Stephen A., and maybe they were right. Because when Ryan asked him directly about LeBron James, Stephen A.'s face shifted. His voice dropped an octave. I don't like him, and he doesn't like me, he said flatly. The room fell silent. But I'll always be fair. He praised LeBron's greatness, his leadership, his philanthropy. He called him the second greatest player ever. But right under those compliments was a pulse of resentment. He said, I know what you've done behind my back. I know what you've tried to do to derail me. Those weren't the words of a man defending his integrity. Those were the words of a man who felt betrayed and wanted the world to know it. That's when it clicked for people watching. This wasn't just about sports commentary. This was personal. This was a long, simmering feud between two black powerhouses. One on the court, one behind the mic, both fighting for dominance in the culture. And the moment Stephen A. said, "If it were up to you, I'd have been stopped years ago," you could feel the bitterness leaking through every syllable. He wasn't just talking about LeBron. He was talking about the media system, the critics, the fans, everyone who ever doubted him. But here's the irony. The same man accusing others of trying to derail him is now accused of tearing down the very community that lifted him up. Steven Jackson called it hypocrisy. Plies called it weakness. Godfrey said it was ego. And Ryan Clark? He barely pushed back. He let Stephen A. talk uninterrupted, unchallenged, giving him a platform to reclaim his narrative. And that's exactly what Stephen A. wanted, control. He even said it himself during the interview. "This is my lane." The way he said it, it wasn't about journalism. It was about ownership, about who gets to define the story. By the end of that interview, one thing was clear. Stephen A. Smith wasn't trying to apologize. He was trying to rebrand. The fiery analyst who used to call out everyone else was now painting himself as misunderstood, targeted, even victimized. He talked about being fair, about doing his job, about telling the truth. But what truth? Exactly? Because when the cameras cut off, the audience was still left with the same question. Does Stephen A. Smith really stand for accountability, or just his own authority? And that's where the conversation turned dark. Because if this was all just another performance, another attempt to spin criticism into clicks, then Stephen A. might have finally become the very thing he once warned others about. A brand that lost its soul. The fallout was instant. Clips from the Ryan Clark interview flooded every corner of the internet within hours. Hashtags like hashtag Stephen as MITH, hashtag LeBron, and hashtag Serena husband trended on X. Comment sections turned into battlefields. Half the people were defending Stephen A., saying he was standing his ground. The other half saw a man trying to rewrite the truth in real time. But one thing was clear. Everyone was talking. Steven Jackson didn't hold back. He jumped online the very next day, calling Stephen A.'s podcast appearance an act. His voice was firm, his message sharper than ever. "You always humble when a white billionaire talks to you, but you loud when it's your own kind," he said. That clip went viral too, millions of views, thousands of comments. Fans started quoting the line like a catchphrase. And suddenly, it wasn't just about Stephen A. Smith anymore. It became about every black man in power who's ever been accused of switching tones to survive in a white industry. Meanwhile, Stephen A. Smith kept posting. He tweeted quotes from the interview, little snippets designed to sound wise, noble, misunderstood. "I'll always tell the truth," one said. Another, "I don't like him, and he don't like me, but I'll always be fair to his followers." That was strength. To his critics, that was spin. Because how can you call it fairness when your tone depends on who's sitting across from you? That's the question people kept asking. And let's be honest, it wasn't just about LeBron James anymore. This was about pattern. The same pattern Stephen A. has shown for years. Fire for his own, softness for the rest. When Alexis Ohanian checked him live on TV, he smiled and moved on. When LeBron James corrected him courtside, he turned it into a months-long public feud. When Serena Williams' husband took a polite jab, Stephen A. laughed it off and complimented his business empire. But when a black player made a mistake, the volume turned up and the empathy disappeared. And fans noticed. They always do. But what really shook people was what Stephen A. said near the end of that interview. The line that made everyone stop scrolling for a second. "If you want to play that game with me, fine. This is my lane." It wasn't just a statement. It was a declaration. A reminder that Stephen A. doesn't just work in the media. He is the media. He decides which stories live and which die. And that's exactly why this controversy hit so deep. Because when a man with that kind of reach starts playing the victim, it blurs the line between truth and performance. Ryan Clark, for his part, stayed cool. He nodded, smiled, and let Stephen A. talk. But even fans noticed how soft the setting felt. There was no tension, no challenge, no accountability. It felt like watching a confession filmed on a set designed to make the confessor look good. Critics called it safe PR theater. Others called it smart strategy. Either way, it worked. The clips trended, the headlines flipped, and for a moment, it looked like Stephen A. had reclaimed control. But then came the pushback. Godfrey, the comedian who had called out Stephen A. earlier, dropped a new video saying he wasn't impressed. That wasn't truth. That was ego, he said. "You can't call yourself real when you only get real after you get checked." Plies reposted the same quote with fire emojis. Even fans who used to defend Stephen A. started admitting that something about his tone felt off, to smooth, to polished, to political. And then came the silence from LeBron James himself. No tweets, no interviews, no statements, just calm, composed silence, the kind that says more than words ever could. That silence became a mirror for Stephen A.'s noise. While Stephen A. was everywhere, podcasts, panels, clips, and tweets, LeBron was nowhere, letting the world decide who looked stronger, the man speaking or the man who didn't need to, and speaking or the man who didn't need to. By the weekend, people weren't debating who was right anymore. They were asking a deeper question. Why does Stephen A. need to win every argument? Because behind the loud voice and the fast talk, you could sense it, insecurity dressed as confidence. A man who built a career on controlling the narrative, now afraid of losing it. A man whose greatest fear isn't being wrong, it's being irrelevant. Still, you have to give him credit. Stephen A. Smith knows how to play the long game. He understands that every controversy is content, every clapback is currency. When he says, "This is my lane," he's not lying. It really is. Because controversy is a highway that keeps his brand alive. But even highways crack under pressure. And this time, it feels like the cracks are showing. Because when your own people start calling you out, when Steven Jackson implies, and Godfrey starts seeing through the act, that's not noise anymore. That's reflection. That's your mirror talking back. And no podcast or PR spin can drown out that sound. In the end, the Ryan Clark interview didn't silence the critics, it fueled them. It gave the world a closer look at a man trying to juggle fame, ego, and identity all at once. It showed the cost of being the loudest voice in the room. When the people you speak for stop believing in your tone. So maybe that's the real story here. Not whether Stephen A. Smith was right or wrong, but whether he's still real. Whether the man who built his empire on truth can recognize when he's become a product of his own performance. And as the cameras fade and the headlines cool, one thing remains: the culture's watching. Because the next time Stephen A. goes off on live TV, the question won't be, is he right? It'll be, who is he really talking to now?